Friends. Well, we're going to discuss tonight 3 ways of proposing. Did you hear about the couple that were going together for about 33 years? And the girl was getting a bit impatient, and she said to him, "Don't you think we ought to think about getting married?" And he said, "At our age, who'd be having either of us?" And now some true stories about proposal, brief ones. This little girl, when she was a young woman, when she was proposed to, was asked by the young man, "What kind of an engagement ring would you like?" And she whipped out of her purse a picture of a ring that she had cut out of a paper 10 years before. There's nothing like being prepared. And then this other young lady had been waiting for a year or two for a proposal, and she was absolutely sure that on Christmas Eve he would bring a ring and propose. So she was watching him very carefully as he came in, and he had a great big box, a fine box of chocolates, which he gave her. Well, she was so mad. When she saw those chocolates, she chucked them all into the fire, ring and all. They're not married to this day. There are various ways of making a proposal, and the way one proposes depends upon how one loves, and there are 3 ways of loving: the Christian way, the romantic way, and the scientific way. The Christian way is based upon the fact that the other person is a gift of God and is a person. A person is composed of body and soul. The body is the source of allurement, the soul is the source of content and consent, and both of them go to make up that which is most precious in this world, namely personality. And in the face of a blessing, such as the other person, one feels a sense of unworthiness. And that is one of the reasons why, in proposing, one regards the other person as a gift, and the other person regards the one proposing as a gift, and both think of themselves as gifts of God that are under some expression of the will of God in a relationship one to the other. And because of that humility, that is why a proposal of that kind is often made on the knees. Because the beloved is always on the pedestal. The lover is always on his knees. He does not deserve that blessing. Every communion has that sense of unworthiness, even though it be the soul with the divine master, or person with person. The cry is, "Oh, Lord, I am not worthy." And in the engagement, man is willing to surrender his freedom out of love. Of course, the girl may say when he proposes, "Now, listen, you say you love me. You say that you love me above every other girl in the world. Do you realize that there are 683,412 eligible young women in this city? Have you tried all of them before you came to me? How do I know that you love me more than you love them?" Well, if he's a good metaphysician, which he probably isn't, but if he is, he will say, "Listen, every act of love is not only an affirmation. Every act of love is also a negation. And the mere fact that I choose you, I reject everyone else in all the world." And that is true of real love. Now, of course, when a man makes the proposal and becomes engaged, he goes through all sorts of fantastic actions. Some have been very well described by Chesterton. When G.K. Chesterton became engaged to Frances Blogg on a bridge in St. James's Park, London, he felt it was necessary, after she had accepted him, to go home and tell Frances Blogg's mother that he had proposed. And Gilbert Chesterton was very nervous. Didn't know exactly how to tell the mother, and the mother perceived that Gilbert was very nervous. She had just finished papering the house. And so she thought, well, maybe she could calm Chesterton a bit by saying, Gilbert, what do you think of the wallpaper? So Chesterton was at art school. He had a great big black crayon in his pocket. And he immediately stood up like a great knight, went to the wallpaper, and drew on the side of the wall a great portrait of Frances, his beloved. And when he proposed to her, he wrote something like this. It was a beautiful expression of a Christian engagement. There are 4 lamps of thanksgiving always before me. The first is for my creation out of the same earth with such a woman as you. The second is that I have not, with all my faults, gone after strange women. You cannot think how a man's self-restraint is rewarded in this. The third is that I have tried to love everything alive, a dim preparation for loving you. And the fourth is, but no words can express that. Here ends my previous existence. Take it. It led me to you. Young men who are like to have copies of Chesterton's proposal may write to me. Then there's another kind of love, which is the romantic love, in which love is divorced from the divine will and from a religious basis. One is not so much interested in the other person. Therefore, one does not have that sense of unworthiness in the face of a gift of God. Rather, one is interested in the other person because of the pleasure the other person gives me. That's romantic love. In other words, the ego, or the self, is projected into someone else. And then it is made to appear that the other person is loved. And all that is loved is the ego in the other person. Hence the German poet Goethe, when he was 74 years of age, proposed to a girl 17 in such romantic, gushy, sentimental language that it was, when it was all over, she didn't know it was her proposal. And Goethe's Faust was not interested in creating love in someone else, expressing reverence. He was only interested in seeing love created in himself. Don Juan the same. Don Juan needed another person in order to beget this experience within himself. But he was without any reverence for a person outside. Stendhal wrote on love at the beginning of the last century. Gave an expression of romantic love that ought to make young women beware. He said that love is like crystallization. He said that in the salt mines of Salzburg, a strange phenomenon takes place. If one cuts the leaves off a limb of a tree and puts the limb down into the salt mine of Salzburg, after several weeks, that limb will come out as if it were glittering with diamonds. Stendhal said that is what you have to do in love. You have to crystallize the other person. Endow the person with qualities in your proposal which the other person really does not have. Well, that kind of romantic love very often ends in something actually that is very unromantic. And perhaps one of the best expressions of that kind of proposal of romantic love, where it is always, remember, the self that is the principal interest, was well expressed in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. That great classic of English literature, you remember, contains the proposal of a clergyman by the name of Mr. Collins to Elizabeth Bennet. Mr. Collins is not on his knees, but he proposes in the romantic fashion. Notice the importance of the I, not the importance of the lady. My reasons for marrying you are. Incidentally, it's the man who always gives the reasons. I love you because you're beautiful, or because you're this, or because you're that. A woman never gives a reason. She loves. That's the reason. So Mr. Collins gives reasons. My reasons for marrying you are, first, that I think it is the right thing to do for every clergyman in easy circumstances, like myself, to set an example of matrimony in the parish. And secondly, that I am convinced it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, which perhaps I ought to have mentioned earlier, that it is the particular advice and recommendation of a very noble lady whom I have the honor of calling patroness. It was but last Saturday night that she said, "Mr. Collins, you must marry. A clergyman like you must marry. Choose properly, choose a gentlewoman for my sake and for your own." It remains to be told why my views were directed to you instead of to my own neighborhood, where I assure you there are many available young women. And now nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection. I'm sure nobody will want this proposal. Well, Elizabeth Bennet, of course, refused Mr. Collins, and he said, "You must give me leave to flatter myself that your refusal of my addresses are mere words. I shall therefore interpret your refusal to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females." In the romantic, too, one might associate the utilitarian. And we'll pass that over very quickly. That's marrying someone for money. And for great money sometimes was asked if you married the most beautiful daughter in the family, and then you were paid a great deal of money if you married the ugliest. Sir Thomas More, the English chancellor and martyr and saint, married the ugliest daughter in a family just to please the family. He happened to be an excellent gentleman. It turned out all right, though she tried to convince him that he should not go to the stake and be martyred for his faith. And then, of course, there is the American businessman that I heard of. When the young man proposed to his daughter, he said, "Leave your name, address, telephone number. If nothing better turns up, I'll phone you." Well, the young man finally married her, and as they came out of the church, the father said to the groom, "I want you to know, young man, that you're the second happiest man in the world." Well, that utilitarian love we can ignore because there's only one kind of love that can be bought. That's a puppy's. Now, in addition to the Christian, and in addition to the romantic and the purely utilitarian, there is the scientific, which is the very modern way of making love. And you'd be surprised how very common this is. As is inspiration in Freud, Sartre, and Marx. Take, for example, love under Marx and communism. The only important thing in all the world, according to Marx, is economic production. And marriage was to sustain private property. It was built upon it, rather. Private property goes, marriage is no longer needed. When communism began in Russia, though they found out socially and experimentally that this plan did not work, but when it began, the communist theory was drink the water, forget the glass. In other words, the person does not matter. The person now completely dissolves and fades away. The Christian person now is not always even the pleasure. And communism has insisted that party leaders in various countries should take the wives that Moscow dictates. And you would be surprised how often that happens. And then there's also the Freudian, where love is reduced to sex. See, what Freud has done is to interpret the person in terms of sex instead of understanding sex in terms of the person. Well, obviously, all human relations are going to be upset on that principle. So that a proposal, Freudian character, might run something like this. Darling, I've been to see my psychiatrist. And I am sure that you have been to see yours. He assures us that we are erotically adjusted. If, therefore, it will be possible for you to give a free expression to your id, so that all of your great primitive libidinous instincts are able to manifest themselves without being submerged or smothered by that terrible superego of religion, morality, myths, and taboos that society, convention, and divinity has given us, well, then I think that possibly we might be able to make a go of this thing for a couple of years. And then those, of course, who do not know Freud and all of the intricacies, but nevertheless live in a purely scientific atmosphere where love is analyzed scientifically and the person disappears. For those, the engagement takes place something like this. The man pulls a ring out of his pocket, maybe. He's in overalls, she's in slacks. How about it, babe? I really and truly know of one young man who's going with this girl. She was not expecting the engagement ring. They had stopped at a restaurant, and he went in to get some food and drink for her, and she was drinking a glass of water, and she almost swallowed the ring. He had put it in the glass of water. Not put on her finger, just in the cup. Person is no longer important. Then, of course, we have in the modern age engagement by univac. Now we've reached the peak of scientific love. Because you put into this great machine your cards, and I put into it my cards, and we finally reach some kind of solution of adjustment as regards marriage. The old ancients, they used to sometimes read the entrails of birds to find out what the future was. Today we read the entrails of machines to discover what we ought to do. And so, in such a machine engagement and proposal of that kind, one might say, well now, my dear, I love rock and rye, you love rock and roll. I love onions, you love florets. You love the Ten Commandments, I like shorts. You like to spend money, I like to make it. You like to smoke cigarettes, I smoke filters. And you were also the kind, I am sure, that you remember how we met. It was in the most unusual way. We were introduced. So I'm your wolf. Will you be my hound dog? And perhaps we can make out a mathematical correlation of a life expectancy of 38 years with an assured annuity of $4,200 a year. And now what's happening? To the beautiful God-given thing called love. This is what's happening. It used to be that individuals sacrificed themselves for institutions. Today, institutions are sacrificed for the whims of individuals. The three great institutions of the universe are the church, the nation, and the family. And a man would sacrifice his own individual life and security and safety in order to defend his faith. Out of that came martyrdom. The second great institution, the nation. Man bore a deep loyalty to his nation. Was willing, if need be, in time of war, to sacrifice his life for the cause of his fatherland. And out of that devotion came our heroes. And then there was another great institution, namely the family. And when there were trials, and when there were crosses, and when there were misunderstandings, man and woman realized that they were two in one flesh, that they symbolized the union of Christ and the church, that they were the carnal symbol in some way of the divine and of a great and mysterious sacrament. And so they would put up with these crosses and trials simply because they bore loyalty to the institution of the family. But now, the world is full of those that will sacrifice the great institutions of the universe, the institutions that hold us together, just for the sake of satisfying an individual fancy. First of all, the church. There'll be some that would not like their pastor, so they give it up. Like jumping over a ship simply because you do not like the captain. And as regards the nation, it used to be that we had only one known traitor in our history. Now there are tens of thousands of them who are willing to sacrifice their fatherland out of a passive devotion, sometimes an active one, for a Marxist philosophy of hate. Then as regards the family, it is only the ego and one's own pleasure and one's own contentment that matters. And in the midst of trials, there's no sense of devotion and loyalty. Why was it that in former days men stood trials for the sake of these great institutions? Simply because all three of them were rooted in God. And because they were rooted in God, therefore one drew strength from the source of these institutions. And if we are ever to become strong again as a nation, young couples have to realize that the love that they have is something that is given to them from above, that every man promises a woman something that woman can never give, that a woman promises a man something that man can never give, namely perfect happiness. Only God can give that. They are merely the John the Baptist announcing the great Messiah. Well, I said, I tell you what I will do. Next Tuesday night, I'll tell the story. Then they'll have to believe you. Now I've paid my debt. Would it please you if tonight we talked on the subject of communism? And the reason we're going to talk about it is because there's considerable confusion in our American life about communism. There's much emotional hate of communism and not very much thinking and reasoning about it for a long time, and even at the present time. Americans generally judge communism by Russia's foreign policy. Now, communism is not to be judged by Russia's foreign policy. If it is, well, then when Russia's foreign policy is favorable to the United States or the Western world, we're apt to believe that communism is good. And when Russia's foreign policy is unfavorable to the Western world, then we fall into the mood of believing that communism is wrong. It is well to realize that communism is wrong independently of Russia's foreign policy. In this particular telecast, we will outline for you, and inasmuch as we have communist listeners, and we attempt to appeal to all listeners, we'll give them a little lesson in communist philosophy. And then for the benefit of the Americans, we'll tell you what is wrong with their philosophy. The two basic principles of communism, two of many, we will have time only for these two, are first what is called economic determinism. The second basic principle is man has value only as a representative of an economic class. We'll take each of these in turn. And inasmuch as my angel loves to blot out everything that is associated with communism, we'll give him a few seconds to do that. First, economic determinism. It sounds very, very learned. It means very simply, however, that culture, civilization, art, religion, philosophy, and morals are all determined by economic methods of production. My angel is just barely getting out of the way here, I see. You see, he has an extra large wing spread, about 21 inches. Other angels only have 17 inches. It makes it a little harder for him. The communist principle is that at the base of society is economics. This is the base. Economic method of production. And everything else, literature, art, morals, politics, religion, all are based upon the methods of production. For example, if your method of production at any given period of history is based upon private property, such as we have here in our democracy, or what we call private enterprise, the communists argue that your literature, your art, your morals and philosophy are all a superstructure and are ultimately based upon economics, but of and by themselves have no value. For example, Your literature must be what kind of literature, the communists say? A defense of private property. Your morals. Morals are based upon economics, and hence, well, your commandments, the communists would say, are based on private property. Take, for example, the 7th and 10th commandments. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Communists say, can't you see that these two commandments are based upon private property? Stealing implies that particular method of production. So does the commandment not to covet your neighbor's goods. Politics, then, is based upon economics. You get a particular kind of a state which defends private property. Religion is based upon it. It's an opium, the communists say. It's an opiate that is given to the workers to make them content with their exploitation, leading them to believe that there's another world to make up for this one. Now the communists say, if you change your method of production, and instead of having private property and private enterprise, you have socialism. In other words, if you put all of the property in the hands of the state, then you have a new literature, morals, art, and philosophy. What kind of a literature do you have? You have a literature which attacks capitalism. You have a literature which makes fun of America. You have a literature of hate. Your morals, you have a new morals based upon economics. Then what is the basic thing that is wrong? Injuring or hurting state property, or in any way betraying the revolutionary class. Art then becomes communistic. And during the days here in the United States, when we were having a honeymoon with Russia, there was a considerable amount of art that was communist-inspired. You can see it in one of the big New York hotels today. You can see it in one of our public buildings. You can see it in some of the public buildings of Washington, inside and in murals. Art in which there are pictures of big, tremendous, muscular men with little heads pushing wheels. No brains, no freedom, just production. Man is an economic tool. This is what is known as economic determinism. In other words, economics determines everything. What is the fallacy? Well, the first fallacy with economic determinism is that Karl Marx, who studied philosophy and who should have known better, confused what is known as a condition and a cause. For example, a window is a condition of light. But a window is not the cause of light. We are willing to admit that economics, to some extent, does determine, does condition literature and art. But it certainly does not cause literature and art. The fallacy of Marx was to make condition equal determination, which was a logical fallacy. Not only is it logically wrong, it's historically wrong. If economics is the cause of culture, why is it that in the pre-Christian era, on the one hand, you had the great Hebrew civilization, and on the other hand, you had, for example, a civilization like the Babylonian, the Chaldean, and others. These civilizations were totally different in kind. They had different religions, different moral concepts, this being the highest moral concept that was known to man in the pre-Christian era. But their economic methods of production were identical. Therefore, economics does not cause the difference in cultures. Take, for example, the Christian era. Rome during the first 3 or 4 centuries, the Roman Empire, had exactly the same economic method of production when it was pagan as when it was Christian. But the civilization and the art and the religion and the morality were totally different. Therefore, it is not the economics that determine civilization. See, economics has gone to the head of the communists almost like wine to an empty stomach. But notice that whenever they appeal to our Western world, whenever they would try to convince us of the superiority of their own system and our weakness, what words do they use? They say, for example, that we are immoral in germ warfare. When they spread that lie, they tell us that capitalism is unjust. They tell us that the way people are treated in the United States is unethical. We ask, by what right and what authority do communists ever use the words right and wrong if everything is economically determined? Ethics, right and wrong, truth and error do not belong in the economic categories. Communism is strong only when it borrows some of the moral indignation that has been inherited from the Hebraic Christian tradition. And communism is weak when it departs from that tradition. In other words, they have bootlegged all of the decency and morality that have come from the great Hebraic Christian tradition of the Western world. And they use it in order to condemn us, which is a reminder of how we ought to meet communism. In the Voice of America and elsewhere, not be talking about the supremacy of economics, because whenever we talk about the supremacy of economics, we are paying tribute to the communist era of the primacy of economics. They are telling speaking to the rest of the world in terms of ethics. We are speaking to the Western world, to the rest of the world, rather, in terms of economics. They are using the language that we ought to be using. We who pride ourselves on being moral and on being right. Then there is another aspect of communism, and that particular one is that man has value only inasmuch as he is a member of a class. In one of his earlier writings, Karl Marx, who was the founder of communism, said, "We have already destroyed the outer priest. Now we must destroy the inner priest. That is to say, man's clerical, spiritual nature." Then follows this very remarkable statement, in which Marx very correctly tells us the essence of democracy. And Marx knows the essence of democracy far better than many who enjoy it. Marx said, "Democracy is founded on the principle of the sovereign worth of every person. This, in its turn, is based upon a postulate, a dream, and an illusion of Christianity, namely that every man has an immortal soul." Then, coming to the first edition of his work on Capital, Marx says, "Persons of and by themselves have no value. An individual has a value only inasmuch as he is a representative of an economic category and belongs to a certain revolutionary class. Outside of that, no value." And Molotov, more recently, carrying on that philosophy, developed the idea that bread is a political weapon. A political weapon. We thought that it was food for the hungry, regardless of who they are. Molotov said, no, bread is only to be given to certain people, those who share your own political revolutionary ideas. This is the basic principle of communism. And so true is it. Remember some years ago, Haywood Broun told me there was a cartoonist on one of the communist sheets in New York. And the cartoonist developed cancer. He was unable to work. And Haywood Broun went to the communists and asked them if they would not give him some pension or help pay his hospital bills. And the answer that he received from the communists was, he's of no use to us. He no longer is a member of a revolutionary class, and therefore for us he does not exist. That was good communism, but it's not good humanitarianism. That explains liquidation. The individual has no value. What it actually is an application to the human order of what prevails in the lower realm of biology, where individuals perish in order that the species may survive. An individual fly, an individual gnat, an individual ant is of no consequence in the lower biological orders. What is of importance is the species. Marx and communism have taken that notion out of biology, lower biology, and applied it to man, and says that what happens to an individual man is of no consequence. What is of importance alone is the revolutionary class, namely the species, communism. That explains what we have seen and read about in Korea, namely the communist tanks running over the bodies of their wounded. No one would ever take them out of the path of any of their great machines, because they're of no worth. It also explains the way they attacked our UN forces. The first line of attack carried guns. The second line of attack would carry mattresses, throw themselves upon barbed wire, be shot. The second group would also come up unarmed, and the third group would have guns. We in democracy would never do that to men. Every man is precious. Every soldier is precious. And this liquidation, man in the modern world, is not going to be met just simply by protests of horror. It means that we have to recognize the evil of this particular philosophy and begin affirming in the United States not just mass culture. We perhaps have had too much of that, namely an emphasis upon humanity, as Hitler put the emphasis upon race, as Mussolini put it upon nation, and as the communists are putting it upon a class. It is now high time to affirm in education, in politics and everywhere else, the sovereign worth of the individual. And that means that man has to get back to the true democratic concept, which Marx recognized, namely that every man is a soul. What we are attempting to do now in our Western world is to preserve the fruits of Christianity without its roots. That cannot be done. And what is unfortunate is that we of the Western world have the truth, but we have no zeal, we have no fire. What has happened to the great patriots, to our great champions of righteousness? The communists have stolen the Pentecostal fires. They have the zeal, but no truth. And we with the truth must also have heat and passion and fire. kind of fire that the Savior came to cast upon the earth. Communists are right in saying this world needs a revolution, but not their cheap kind, which merely transfers booty and loot out of one man's pocket into another. We need the kind of a revolution in the United States and in the rest of the world that will purge out of a man's heart pride and covetousness and lust and anger and envy and gluttony and sloth. In other words, the true battle against communism begins within the heart of every single American. It means the recovery of our own great tradition, of our belief in God, of an affirmation in politics and in economic life, and among our politicians, of the things that are right and true before God. Then we need not fear communism, for if God is with us, then who can be against us? God love you.
It began here, in the upper room, 2,000 years ago. This is my body. This is my blood. Remember me. In a garden he prayed to his Father on a night of betrayal, torture, death, far from Galilee. When taken from his rack of torment, in a borrowed grave he lie. On the third day the angel said, "He has risen. He did not die." After sharing with friends, he rose to the Father, leaving his spirit love to guide our journey. For he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, together again. People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always waited with joy for his goodbye, his blessing, "God love you." It continues to give us joy and memories.
Bye now, and God love you.
Bishop Fulton Sheen went to be with the Lord in December of 1979. Fulton Sheen